Good. I'm going to give everyone a second to hop in. Good morning. We have our lovely panelists here with us this morning. So welcome to everyone who is joining us and connecting in. I know it'll take a minute or two for the audio to kind of click in, but for those of you that have never joined us before, my name is Panayota Papadopoulos. I use she, her pronouns from Turning Point of Lehigh Valley. And today with us, we have our wonderful, incredible, very intelligent, very hilarious, we were just cracking up together, panelists. We have Geraldine Infante and Mary McKenna, who are two of our child and teen advocates here at Turning Point of Lehigh Valley. So obviously, if you've joined, you know, today we're talking a little bit about how to break the cycle, talking about how to support teens and children in really recognizing those healthy relationships, recognizing what's unhealthy, and making sure that we can break the cycle and have that, you know, important conversation. Really quick, I guess, before we start our conversation, I do want to quick share for next month, if you are able to join us, we are going to have a conversation about the intersection between brain injury and domestic and intimate partner abuse. So we have our speakers for next month, Melissa Robinson, Training and Education Director, Stephanie Kolakowski-Hayner of Good Shepherd, and Miriam Rivera, who is also from Turning Point as our Community Advocacy Director. So we hope you join us. Please feel free to view it on the website. We have all of our event information on there. But yeah, so welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
I guess first off, since we're talking about teen, you know, both being part of the child and teen advocacy team, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what your day looks like? I know that, you know, you do kind of a little bit of everything, right? You're not just teaching and doing the education and prevention and awareness, but you're also doing that sort of counseling piece as well for children and teens. So talk to me about what does your day look like? Whoever wants to start.
You want to start, Miss G?
Yeah, I'll start. So usually it's we're at a school for like 3 hours doing individual counseling or support groups there. And then we get to come back to the safe house and have counseling here as well and do like social activities with the kids. And it usually looks like that Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays.
Yeah. And you're throughout, like you have a couple different schools that you work through, right? It's high schools and middle schools, I think, too.
It's high schools, but then like we also do outreach, and then outreach is middle schools and elementary schools.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you do with your, between counseling and between children and teens, right? There's sort of this layup between different age groups that you work with. What are some of the signs of either unhealthy relationships or abusive relationships that you might see, and how does that change based on age?
That's a really good question.
I think that for like primarily high school and middle school, because we are seeing it in middle school as well. The biggest sign I think that parents or like support systems could look out for is just like any change in their typical behaviors. So if they're like normally an A/B student and their grades are dropping, or if they're like dressing differently, or they have a new friend group, or their phone is constantly blowing up with text messages and phone calls from somebody, and you're like, who's that? But they're avoiding telling you. Like any of those not typical behaviors, I would say is like a little bit of a red flag of let's talk about this. Let's see what's going on. Yeah, that's what I see normally.
Like, especially from the parent and caretaker perspective, right?
Right.
You typically
Yes.
know your kids,
Yeah.
you typically know how they behave. So if you're seeing something that's like, this looks out of the ordinary, hold
Right.
on.
Right.
That would
Yeah.
be a sign of something else going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we see that like in 8th grade going into 9th grade as well. Like a lot more common now. They kind of they're very subtle changes. Everything, like the mood, how they're speaking, what they're like what Mary said, what they're wearing, everything like that.
I think sometimes the like automatic thought is that you know, teens who might be going through, or even kids who might be going through an abusive situation, that they automatically will withdraw. Do you find that that's always the case? Or is it just a change in behavior period?
I don't ever want to say it's always the case, because I think that case by case, it's always different. I think withdrawing is a huge example of a red flag of what we see, or like a big example is like if they're involved in like sports or clubs and then they're like, no, I don't want to do that anymore, or they're really close with a certain friend group and now they're changing that, or they're like not hanging out with anyone besides their partner. Like we definitely see a lot of that, but it's not always the case either.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so yeah, we have that level of pulling away, that level of difference in behaviors. In going to the schools, can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing there? I know that there's some support groups and stuff like that that you do while you're there. What does that look like?
So in schools, we're doing individual counseling. So we might see like 5 kids in a day, and then we do support groups, which we have a male empowerment group, which is called Spaces, and then a female empowerment group, which is called I Am Her. And those groups, honestly, they run themselves. So they can come in and be like, Miss, I gotta talk to you about toxic. Like my boyfriend just came in and did this, da, 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 and they just talk about whatever is going on. So yeah, that's mostly what we're doing in schools.
Do you find that that's the case even from the start, like that the kids come in and they're like, Miss G, let's talk? Or does it take time to kind of build that level of trust? And then once you have that,
No, it takes time. They kind of like don't trust that it's confidential. I won't tell nobody. They're like, everybody says that. And then I tell them like I can go to jail. So, and then they kind of like ease up to it. Once they see us 2 times, 3 times, they'll come in there and they always have something to say
yeah.
about what their day goes.
I think
Yeah,
also, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think like what's so great about the support groups that we offer is that like we can never mandate anyone to be there. It's always the kid's choice to attend and be present. And so like the school can recommend somebody be there, or a parent can recommend like, hey, I think this is a good idea for you, but they choose that for themselves, right? And so we do have kids who are attending who at first are like, no, I don't need to be here. No, I don't need to be here. I'm not in an unhealthy relationship. This doesn't apply to me. But they come back every week, and they may not say anything, or they may say like, oh, that's never happened to me. But slowly they start to disclose things, or you can like see the change in them from like hearing what you're saying, but then they actually start to like listen to what you're saying and apply it to their daily lives as well. So
Credibility starts to get built.
right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And I know like in schools, they have like drug and alcohol groups or things like that where they are mandated to attend. And so that's the difference between what we're doing.
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of what you guys say really hones in on that empowerment piece that we, here at Turning Point really focus on, where there's that level of empowerment. It's not, I'm here and let's do this, like, let's go. I know you're in an abusive relationship and I'm gonna tell you exactly what you need to do, right? It's like, no, I recognize that, an abusive situation is often on that level of power and control where somebody's taken that control, that power away from you. And I'm here to just help you rebuild that back up, learn to build your confidence, learn to like, decide for yourself what is best for you ultimately. And I'm just here to support that. Right. So I love that that's part of that group, and that that other reminder too, Geraldine, you mentioned like the confidentiality piece. Like, I think that's a really important piece. I know I go into colleges a lot of time with training and education, and a lot of times, even at the college level, there's a lot of private resources where they talk about, okay, like I know I can go to this person, but I don't know what other staff members are learning this information about me. But that confidentiality piece really ties into, like, unless there is child abuse going on where we are mandated reporters, other than that, like anything you share with us is absolutely confidential. Like we are here to support you and make sure that excuse me, everything is, you know, protected and as per what you want ultimately, right? So, Miss G or Geraldine, as you know, everyone calls you, I love that. You mentioned that a lot of times the kids come into you and are like, you know, we need to talk about this toxic thing that happened with, you know, my boyfriend, my partner, whoever the case may be. So there's a lot of like terms that especially I think the teenage or, you know, middle school and up tend to use, right? He's so toxic, or like, oh, you know, you started dating somebody, let me stalk their profile and let me see, you know, what they're about, or there's dramatic, or, you know, another one that I hear often is like, well, they keep getting me gifts, or this looks really romantic, but like, I don't know if I like it, kind of thing. So can you talk a little bit about some of those terms that are thrown around that we kind of casually toss around that maybe shouldn't be so casual? Or yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
Honestly, I learn every day about new terms. I'm always like, what do you mean by that? Um, but yeah, there's a lot of like TikTok terms that they're learning. I think that they use a lot of violence in the language that they use as well. The little simple one is like shoot your shot, and that's already like a lot of violence in there.
Mhm.
And also how they talk about their partners as well. One of the sessions that we do like in the support groups, just to kind of like see where you guys are at and why you're using these words, is to like, what are these words? Let's really define it. And even if it's like simple words, like what is a relationship? Let's define that. So it's not only just the language they're using, but also the other words that they might be using on a daily basis. That's like, no one has really sat down with them and defined it.
Mhm.
I know me and Mary are always like, what did they say? What is it? We always challenge them to kind of be like, oh, you mean you're dating? You're not just talking. Like, you mean you're just talking to, okay. So I don't know. I think it's just a part of educating them of what it really means and how to like change their language almost. Even
Yeah.
if
Yeah, I think
she's
sorry, go ahead.
like, if they say like he's so toxic, he's always like checking my location. Maybe like just changing like, okay, what do you mean this? I don't know, just what's the need there?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Mary.
I was just gonna add that I think the language used really like glorifies
Mm-hmm.
the abuse, or even like minimizes it. Like you know, like personally, I have said like, let me stalk their profile without like thinking about it. But you know,
Mhm.
as Geraldine were going over these questions, I was like, oh yeah, that really does minimize you know, something very serious, you know. And it like becomes normal language that everybody is using these days. But I think like we as advocates need to check the language that we're using. And then also, like Geraldine said, like this might be normal language that the teens are using, but in group or in individual sessions, let's break that down and help them define that, and like help them see that like this isn't normal, this isn't healthy. And like Geraldine said, like there's so many different words used nowadays that like I have no idea what these kids are saying, and I literally am like, can you please define that for me, because I don't know what you're saying. I
Yes.
literally don't know what that sentence means. So
Like you
um
almost need a dictionary just
right,
for
yeah, absolutely. But then when they're defining it, you can see them kind of like take a step back and be like, oh, maybe that isn't a good thing to say, you know. So
yeah. As when I was looking up, you know, different topics around this topic, I looked up, I saw this whole list of terms like breadcrumbing,
yeah.
ghosting. Like I was like, where did these all come from? But really, a lot of them, when you really break it down, like you're saying, it really comes back down to that level of like, is there equal energy and effort? Is there that level of honesty and communication and trust, right? Those
Mhm.
things that we really do look for in those healthy relationships. But like all of these terms almost complicate that understanding of like, is this a healthy relationship? Is this not? And I think that that is another big piece of why it's so hard for teens and adults even to recognize like, this is toxic, but like, is it abusive? You know, but when in reality it really is like it's falling under that level of unhealthy, that level of abusive with, you know, it's toxic. They're checking my location. they're reading my texts. They want to make sure they're looking at my DMs and looking, know my password so they can check. And a lot of times the argument that you hear back is like, well, I don't have anything to hide. Like, that's cool, that's fine. But it has to be ultimately your choice. Like, you have to be the one consenting to that. It can't just be like expected and coerced and pressured to do certain things that you're, may or may not be comfortable with, right? That level of privacy is still important.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like to bounce off of that is, I think that like, for example, the sharing of locations is such a normal thing amongst this generation that like they might not know that they can say no to that, or like it's okay for you to say no, I don't want you to have my location. And so like redefining to them what is healthy, or what boundaries do you want in place is a big conversation that we have with a lot of the kids that we work with.
Yeah. So that's actually something that came up in a previous conversation where, in regards to parents, right? Where, location safety is an important piece of, a parent making sure that their child is safe.
Right.
The relationship factor, it might not be the healthy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that or differentiation, how to recognize when it's healthy or maybe when it's crossed the line?
I think when it's unhealthy, they're like, I've heard like examples of the abuser, the unhealthy person being like, where are you? Where are you at? Why are you here? Why aren't you back home? You said you were gonna leave. It's a lot of like questions. It's not really, and they don't even care about the response.
Mhm.
Sometimes I've heard like people like show up to the place that you're at without even like announcing it, like they just go to the location. I think but I also think it's hard because the abusive person will be like, I just want to know because I want you to be safe.
Mhm.
And I just care about you and I love you. And why would you didn't do that for me? And I think for a parent, it's just like, hey, where are you? And it's the parents, and then the person responds and says, oh, I'm at a friend's house. Okay, let me know when you get home safe.
Right.
There's a different one. There's a whole different like way to communicate those two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of the parent approach has to be, that level of conversation after the fact, like, hey, how did things go? Talk to me about what's going on, where that level of honest and open communication is there, where they're building that trust and credibility, kind of like you guys do with your groups, but at the same time, it's still there at the home where they have that opportunity to really talk to their kids so that if a situation does come up, they feel safe enough to be, that person to go to. Um, I have two different ways I'm like debating. Do I talk about more of the parent support approach, or I guess let's backtrack for a second and just talk a little bit about you mentioned kind of like those little nuanced examples. And I think that it's important sometimes for people to recognize, at Turning Point, we've been really intentional about making sure that our language is domestic and intimate partner abuse and not necessarily violence, even though domestic violence or intimate partner violence is the more common term in society, right? And I think that intentionality has been the case because we want to make sure that people don't think that it's just about physical abuse, right? That there's all these other layers or, facets of abuse that come up. So can you talk a little bit about the major types of abuse that we see and what types of examples there are?
Want me to take this, Geraldine? I think it's very similar, if not exactly the same as what you see in an adult relationship that's abusive. There's physical, like, I mean, there's no denying that we see kids that are being physically harmed by their partner. We hear about it in the news, we see it, in the media. And so the physical is absolutely there. Included with physical is the sexual abuse. I think Miss G and I were having a conversation yesterday of like the amount of disclosures of sexual assaults that we hear. I think, I don't want to say, well, especially among the girls that we talk to, but it does occur with the males that we're talking to as well. So both physical and sexual are very much prevalent in these relationships. And then I think that like the emotional and verbal is obviously also there. A lot of put downs, a lot of name calling. And it's also, like I was saying before, language that's almost been like normalized for people to use, and it's like in their everyday language. And when we take a step back and look at that, we're like, wait, this isn't okay for them to be calling you that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also they joke a lot. One thing that we do in middle schools is say if is it a red flag or green flag if you play fight and it's a green flag. But once you talk to them like, well, what if they had a bad day and they hit you? And they're like, wait a minute, that turns into a red flag. So it's a lot of like there's the abuse is used like in a joking way, if that makes sense. Like they'll be like, oh, we're just joking. Like me and him call each other out on our names all the time. It's just a joke.
Mhm.
But it could turn, it's just scary to see if it's just a joke. How does it look like when it's real?
Right.
And we also just been getting like a lot of referrals where there's security cameras of like physical abuse at schools.
Mhm.
But yeah.
No, that like gave me chills a little bit. How do we know when it's real if it's just a joke, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think especially with, the younger ages, it's really important to be aware of that sort of fine line in a way. Like, how do you know when it's just switching from joking to like, hey, this is serious? Because with physical abuse or sexual abuse, you don't always need that level of physical contact for it to count or for it to, be abusive, right? If I'm sharing intimate photos with somebody and now they've shared it with somebody else without my consent, like that's still a level of sexual abuse. I don't have that consent, or I'm not offering that consent for where my, information is going. Um,
I find that happens a lot in middle school where pictures
Middle
will be
school even.
in middle schools, yeah.
Mhm.
A lot in middle schools where they share pictures and they don't know where the picture is or where they're getting like they're being forced to send a picture. But middle school, yeah.
Yeah, that pressure and that coercion, I think, is like a really important piece to that. Where is that fine line, right? Do I feel pressured to be doing this? Do I like it's like a play fight is like fun when both people are having fun, but when one person isn't, it's like, okay, maybe we need to stop here. Um,
I always say when you let one thing slide, it's ice skating. So if you let if you let like a little hit slide and they're just there like, oh no, we're just joking. You just never know when someone's gonna have a bad day.
you're so good with the one-liners today, gee. I love it. No, that's awesome. I
I
think
was going to add to that. I think that, sometimes we hear people say like, are you guys okay? Like, I saw you arguing in the hallway, and they'll like minimize or downplay, oh no, we were just playing. And that, has occurred in our group setting before. And to me, in my head, I'm like, if it's concerning to somebody in the hallway what you're looking at, right? And you're saying it's play fighting, what does that look like behind closed doors when nobody's around? And so like bringing that to their attention and having those types of conversations is important also.
I know another form of abuse that we often talk about that is super common in the adult world, but maybe not as discussed in the teen world is levels of financial abuse, which, as a child or a teen, you don't necessarily have your own income, but there could still be that level of, whether it be a power imbalance or a financial imbalance in some way. Do you have any examples that maybe would be important to mention? I know it's probably more likely within teens than with children, but
Yeah. I mean, an example I could give is like if somebody has a car, right, and the other person doesn't have a car, there's a little bit of a power imbalance there. If somebody is older, like a senior in high school is dating a freshman or a sophomore in high school, there's that power imbalance also. Financial is difficult, but these kids do have jobs. And if so, somebody is working and then spending all of their money on their partner and like buying them gifts and taking them out to dinner and like saying, I do all of these nice things for you. Why don't you love me? Or why don't you do this for me? You know, like there is that level of power in order for them to gain control over the partner
Right.
in those situations as well.
Yeah, it comes back down to that level of coercion and even
Right.
stalking where like I left you this gift at your class, I left you this note at, you know, wherever, where if it's unwanted and it's been expressed like, hey, I'm not into that, or I'm not into you, and that person continues, like that's another form of that unhealthy. It might not be the intimate partner relationship, or maybe it was a past relationship, but it still counts as that level of abuse that's coming up, right? Where it's
Yeah. I mean, just an example that just popped into my head is I had a client at one point who was in an abusive relationship, and her boyfriend, every time that they had an argument, it would like go back into that honeymoon phase. And she knew it was going back into that honeymoon phase because he would send her her favorite food to her house. And she was like, I mean, that's so sweet. And I love that he's sending me food. But it's just this cycle repeating itself. Like, I know we just had an argument. Now we're in this honeymoon phase. He's sending me food to my house. And then it's going to go back into
back to the tension
right.
and
Yes. Yeah.
emotion and everything along those lines. Yeah. You know, I think let's talk about myths, right? With common themes that come up, common myths that people think are the norm, maybe stereotypically are the norm, but what are some common things that you see that, or questions that come up that you really have to address and make sure that you're, you know, we talked about language a little bit. What other things do you see?
Maybe that doesn't happen to boys as often, but I think that what we're seeing now is that it really does happen to boys. Boys are just taught to tough it out. It's okay. She's pretty
And
anyways.
up.
It's a win. Like, so there's a lot of that. Or like if a girl hits a boy, it's okay because it's a girl. Like, so we do have to talk about a little bit about that. And also, I think a question that comes up is like every relationship has its downfall. Like people go through a lot of stuff, but it's but what kind of stuff are we talking about? We're talking about cheating and going back and forth, or are we talking about like you just had a disagreement and maybe a need wasn't met? So those are the ones that come up to my head. Do you have some, Mary?
No, I think what you said about the boys, you know, the spaces group that we have in the high schools now is specifically for boys. And so with that, we are getting a lot more disclosures of, you know, them being in abusive situations, or they're like talking about things and they don't recognize that what happened to them was abuse, you know? And so like it's kind of like rewiring their thinking of like, no, that wasn't okay. Like if you didn't want that to happen, it shouldn't have happened to you. So
it's funny. I've been watching a lot of reality dating shows because that's my guilty pleasure. And one of which, you know, I was watching a rerun of like Love is Blind last night. And it's funny because, you know, the boys all got together and they were like, but bro, you know, like this happened. Like, are you sure you're okay with that? And then you're right. Like you heard exactly that comment of like, but look at her. She's so pretty. Like, you know, you're already lucked out. But then that level of like that emotional abuse or those things that might not necessarily be the healthiest are dismissed as like,
right.
but that's not what you should be looking for. You should be looking at, you know, are you getting this? Are you getting that out of the relationship? And if you have that, like you're golden. But men still have feelings, men still have needs too. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
and,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
period. Like whether male identifying, female identifying, you know, non-binary identifying, like everybody still has needs that need to be met. You know, that need to be communicated, that you need to find that healthy, consensual middle ground where everybody's sort of feeling heard and trusted and safe. I know another big topic that often comes up again in the adult world, but how does this relate to teens is that question of like, okay, you know, this is not a healthy relationship. You know, this is toxic. Why don't you just leave? Right? How does that, what barriers might teens have? They don't necessarily have the typical, you know, again, financial constraints or shared housing, but what other things might teens come up with that make it hard for them to leave a toxic or unhealthy situation?
I think one of the things that we don't think about is it's the same trauma, like the same trauma to the brain. They're being impacted in the same way as an adult would be. There's a level of like attachment. There's trauma bonding in that. I think it's a lot of emotional like abuse that happens that doesn't allow the teen to leave. And also I was thinking in the group where something came up, because we asked this question, why do teens stay? And they kind of give us answers to that. And I think one of the ones that stood out to me was, well, he was like the first one that like saw me and he compliments me, and in my family that doesn't happen. Like no one really like talks to me. Everybody ignored me. So it's kind of like that attachment that they have. And also that fear of leaving, like what would happen if I did leave? Would he get worse or would they get worse? Or I don't know, like fear of what would happen to their safety as well.
Yeah, I think just like in an adult relationship, leaving is the most dangerous, statistically the most dangerous time for anybody to leave a relationship, you know? And so everything that Gerald, I keep wanting to call you Miss She, I'm sorry. Everything that Geraldine stated 1,000%. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. But it's also just not a safe situation for them to leave, you know?
We often find ourselves like giving them guidance of when to leave. Like if you are gonna leave, don't do it in a car. Don't break up in a car. Don't go to his house or their house and be in a locked room. Like do it in a safe place, in a public place. Make sure someone knows you're going to leave.
Yeah.
In case something happens, you can call them. So we do a
The
lot
other
of
thing I wanted to pick up on is like they go to the same school. Typically they go to the same school, right? And so like in an adult relationship, you don't necessarily have to see that person
Every
after
single
you
day.
break up,
Yes.
you know, but in a high school relationship or middle school relationship, you're going back to see them every single day. And it makes it just that much harder to leave and stay away, you know, when you're seeing them. And there's friend groups involved, and you know, I mean, it's just as hard for teenagers as it is for adults to leave these relationships.
And I think we forget sometimes as adults, like these are their formative relationships, right? A lot of
Yes.
times it does
Yeah.
start, like abusive relationships will start at that middle school age from, grade 6 and up, which sounds insane, but at the same time, that's a lot of times when we talk about like the psychological development of children, a lot of times that is the age where they're starting to sort of define themselves within their friend group and within, their groups in general. So yeah, like for them, that might be the beginning of what I understand a relationship looks like and what I understand is healthy. So that's why
Yeah, or sorry, I keep
no, go. Love it.
Or they've witnessed it at home their entire lives, right? And so then it's like, this is normal. I don't need to leave this because this is what a relationship is or what it looks like, you know? And then if Turning Point comes in and says, hey, this is not healthy, right? And they try to leave that relationship, it's still a very difficult thing to do. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we've sort of skirted around this topic a couple times, so I'm going to come back to it. So, I'm sure that there's a lot of parents and caretakers and adults in this conversation right now and listening in. So I guess the question, there's a lot of questions around that. But just to start, like, how can we tell a lot of times we tell teens, like, talk to a safe adult, make sure you find a safe adult. How do we, first of all, how can teens recognize what a safe adult looks like, and how can we as adults become that safe adult? Sorry, that was 2 in 1. 2 in 1, dude.
Wait.
Yeah, go
First question.
Yeah, go
How
ahead.
do you identify a safe adult?
How can teens identify safe adults?
Okay. A safe adult has like direct conversations and open conversations. They have boundaries. They keep their word. A teen is looking for that. Someone that keeps their word. If they say they're not going to do something or they are going to do something, that word is kept. And they're not judging you based on what you're saying. They're not telling you what to do. They're kind of like, hey, what do you think about that? And what do you feel about this? Kind of guiding you through that. And I think also trust your gut. I'm stealing this answer from Mary, but trust your gut. Make sure that like if you are talking to an adult and you don't feel like this is not good, kind of trust that gut and find another one that kind of gives you a good gut feeling.
Yeah. Mary, she took your answer, I guess.
No, I tell probably every single child or teen that I come into interaction with to like really pay attention how your body feels when you are interacting with people. And if you get like younger children, I'll say like if you get that icky feeling or if
Yeah.
like it doesn't feel good, right? Like it probably isn't good. It probably isn't safe. And so like listen to that, even if there's nothing else about that person that, you know, is off, but for some reason you don't feel good about it. Like really pay attention to your gut and how you feel about the person. And I think that will most of the time help you in recognizing who is safe for you to talk to, you know? But I think everything that Geraldine said, like a safe adult has boundaries, right? You can trust them. They communicate well. I think for us, a lot of the times, you know, we have to tell kids that we are mandated reporters, right? And so like Geraldine said, like giving that informed consent of like, this is who we are, this is what we're here for, but this is what happens if you were to disclose child abuse. And just like staying true to what you tell the kids as well. Yeah.
That reliability, that
Yes.
consistency.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That credibility. Again, it comes back down to building that credibility and making sure that you are that. Yeah, so I guess a lot of this ties into the second question too, right? Of as adults, how can we make sure that we are being, you know, the safest choice for somebody to come to?
I really think it's not judging the teen, not judging them, not forcing them to do something. Well, I would do this, and when I was in your situation, they don't need that. They just need somebody to listen to. Maybe just guide them, be like, well, do you feel safe in that? Kind of guide that conversation. Most of the time they're looking for someone to listen. And just guide, yeah.
To bounce off of that, I think it's also like educating ourselves as adults as to like what actually is going on in this child's life. And if that means like downloading TikTok and seeing what's popping up on there, like maybe we need to do that to get on their level, you know, and like educating them or educating yourself on relationships and what's normal in this generation's relationships, I think is really important for adults to just know, you know, the reality of what life is today and what they're experiencing. I think that's really helpful in like building the rapport and the trust with the teens as well. And then they're more willing to share with you what exactly is going on.
Yeah, I know you mentioned TikTok, and I feel like social media always comes up with these conversations, right? Where there's that level of potential digital abuse or even the possibility of digital means becoming that means of unhealthy behaviors continuing to be normalized. So I guess in regards to, you know, the kids that you talk to, how does the media come up? Do you find that it's often norms that have to be, you know, destabilized and broken down more? Or do you find that it actually is helpful and kids come to you and are like, oh, I learned this thing on TikTok. Like, is this true? And then they start to recognize those healthy behaviors. Like, what do you see in your practice?
I think I'm laughing because I don't think they ever say I learned this on TikTok.
That's true. That's a good point.
A sixth grader recently told us a story about how they viewed an abusive couple. Like he killed her at the end of it on TikTok. So that's a sixth grade explaining that. And it was kind of like normal to her to kind of say it to us and be, but at the end she was like, that's a little scary. Um,
Oh,
Teens, I think TikTok normalizes a lot of abusive relationships because TikTok is an entertainment world. You get paid to be abusive on TikTok almost, right?
mhm.
And on a feed, like TikTok works like this. You watch one video, it could be an abusive relationship video, and they're like hidden
That
yellow
algorithm. Yep.
scroll, and you see a funny video, and then you scroll again, and there might be another abusive video.
Mhm.
The problem is nobody is stopping that kid and be like, wait, what did you just see there? Like,
Mhm.
let's process that. What was that? That wasn't okay. That's not normal. But it becomes normal because they're just scrolling and be like, la 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 about their day.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but that comes up as like more like normalizing unhealthy relationships.
Mhm.
I think that social media also like is big on these buzzwords. Like we hear these kids say like, oh, that's gaslighting, or oh, that's toxic,
Mhm.
or like they know like the words trauma bonding, but then when we like sit with them and like ask them to explain that to us, it's so off. You know, like they have the language, but they don't have the definitions for what it actually means.
Yeah.
So I think that it's great that they know those words, but I wish that social media was able to like
The
define it for
education.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because, you know, I do have TikTok, and on my TikTok I follow all like the healthy stuff, so that's what I get, right? But if you
Right.
follow, it's like that algorithm again, if you start to follow or you even see a couple videos of one topic, that's what you start to receive. And then it again kind of solidifies that belief in you of, well, this is normal or this is okay. And it's not. So, and back in the day we could put ad blockers and stuff on what kids were viewing, but now there's not necessarily that level of protection from a parent to a child.
Mhm.
Um, Goodness. There's a question in the chat that I wanted to get to. So in regards to confidentiality, um, our question says, I feel I dramatize what needs to be shared. Um, a lot of times I think in regards to um there's confidentiality in regards to, everything other than mandated reporting with child abuse, but then there's also, I think sometimes the level of in regards to like counselors, therapists, still also have to share if somebody threatens to harm themselves or others. So I guess the question is like any advice on how to adjust to help build trust?
With the teen.
Yeah, so I say abuse, neglect, harm to self, or harm to others must be reported. Otherwise, this is a completely confidential conversation, is what this person shares. So they're saying, is there any advice on how to adjust that um, disclosure
Language.
or
Yeah.
that, you know, on how to help build that trust?
Mm. I feel like they're all when they hear that, it's just we all have the same script. We all
Mhm.
sound alike, but also kind of calling that out that we all do sound alike. I always say like I know your guidance counselor say that, and then they call your mom and they're like, "Hey, your daughter," and that kind of they start laughing about it. Um, but I lost my train of thought. I think we don't allow kids to be themselves. Kids
Mhm.
curse when they talk, they say things. If you allow the kid to be themselves and kind of talk in that way, they'll have that trust. I think when we say like, no, no, don't say that, don't say this, we are like taking away an opportunity to really educate them on what's going on and also gain that trust of like, you can say that in here, but obviously I'm not repeating that. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, I think that's the way I build trust with them. They can be themselves in that room. And I also stop kids. Like when I hear like, hey, remember this, remember that.
Mhm.
And then they kind of be like, okay. And then they go back to their, does that make sense?
So yeah, like allowing them to be real and genuine,
Mhm.
but pausing the conversation where the pause needs to happen to understand and educate the healthy norms. It sounds like that's what you're saying,
Yeah.
right? Mary, did you have anything? No pressure.
Um, I think that like the way that we've changed our language to domestic and intimate partner abuse, right? I think it's when you're I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, if you're giving informed consent that I am a mandated reporter, and if somebody if somebody's abusing you, or I have to report that. Is that the question? Like, how do we use different language there?
I think when it comes to confidentiality, like Geraldine said, that a lot of times, any adult in a caretaker position often will say like this conversation is
Right.
confidential. Right. So how do we build that trust when somebody comes to us and make sure that it's not just the disclosure, but like that our words are following our actions essentially,
Oh, okay.
as if I'm not mistaken. That's kind of what I understood of it.
I feel like I was walking, sorry, nope.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I feel walking them through it as well. Like if you do have to report something, tell them the steps that's gonna happen. Like, hey, like you said this, I'm doing this because I want you to be safe. That happens, then like walk them through it. Don't surprise them with it, because then they're gonna be like, where did this come from? Go ahead, Mary. That was just my little 2 seconds.
I don't know that I really have anything else from what Geraldine said. I think it's just like being that listening ear for them, and allow, like you said, just to allow them to be themselves, and that is what's going to build the trust in the relationship. But I think, like, again, as providers, we do have to inform them of if you are being harmed or someone's hurting you, like we do have to report that. And I think what Geraldine was saying is, like, if you feel a disclosure about to happen, like we don't want to stop that disclosure from happening, but we do want the kids to know exactly what happens after they disclose that. So if we feel that's coming, stopping, pausing, saying, hey, if this is where this conversation is going, like this is what the next steps for me are, and allowing them then to make the decision whether or not they want to share that information with us.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. Like just having that, making sure that you're having that conversation of, again, it comes back down to that level of consent and
Right.
empowerment, right? Making sure
Empowerment,
that the kid knows that if this is what you plan on sharing, which it doesn't have to be, but if it is, this is the next step. And it
Right.
also takes away that level of fear of like, well, what happens now?
Yes.
Will you tell my mom? Will you, contact a doctor? Like what, is that something that comes up a lot with the empowerment counseling in general, with that individual level of counseling of, do you, if somebody comes to you and schedules an appointment, do you kind of talk to them about, okay, well, here's the process, here's what this looks like next, here's what's going to happen? Yeah.
Starting individual counseling with, like, for your first time is scary. Like you never know what's gonna happen. So you kind of want to walk them through those nerves, like that every session is gonna look different. This is what happens when I do have to do like a report. I would like, I'm really good, I feel like, at stopping conversations and making sure they are reminded multiple times, like, this is what's gonna happen. I even tell them, like, someone's gonna go to your door from Children and Youth. They're gonna knock, they're gonna interview mom, they're gonna interview you. These are what the interview questions might be like. You can tell them whatever you want. So yeah, I don't know if
Just having them, understand that conversation of what's coming up next. Another question that came in is, can you comment on any cultural considerations to keep in mind in regards to that level of, I guess, abusive relationships within cultural differences? So I know we were talking about this a little bit before the webinar, of sort of the non-stereotypical type relationships, but even to that level of cultural differences. So, yeah.
Something that like just popped into my head from group is Miss G is Hispanic. And so there are girls in our group who are also Hispanic, right? And so they're coming from these home lives where, and Miss G, you can correct me at any point here, but where like the male or the father is considered the head of the household, right? And like they are in charge. And I think like that's just an example that popped into my head of in different cultures, like it might be normal for a man to be, you know, in control, in charge, the head of the household. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay for them to be abusive, right? But it is part of their culture that they are
That it's more
typically the head,
patriarchal than
right? Yeah,
matriarchal or
right.
vice versa, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know another thing that often comes up is like, you know, I think in a lot of, you know, not just Hispanic culture, but, you know, I'm Greek, if you can't tell by my name. And even in Greek culture, I feel like a lot of times, you know, there's that if things happen in the family, it stays in the family. Like we don't seek out outside support. We don't seek out help. Like we figure
Right.
it out.
I mean,
Um,
that's also like I grew up Irish Catholic, right? And that's very typical in those in that religion and in those households. It's like it's going to stay within our own family. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to ask for help. So yeah.
yeah, I think
I
that,
also think as we're just talking, you know, there are other cultures who don't believe in mental health services at all, right? And so we're coming in and we're talking to them about all of these things where they've grown up in an environment where like that is not a reality to them. Like they don't see mental health as a real problem. And so, yes, there are a lot of cultural, you know, influences that impact this. I also think that like just because one Hispanic family does it this way, we don't assume that all of them are like that. It's really just like getting to know the individual person for who they are and what their life experiences are as well. So never just like assume just because one of your clients was like this that they all are like that.
Mhm. I think sometimes too that, you know, either being from that same culture or understanding that type of culture helps with building that level of credibility. Like, look, I get it. It's really hard. Like, I know Braley, our child and teen advocacy director, I'm gonna put him on the spot for a second, but I love this. He has, you know, a sticker on his door, I believe, that says, you know, you'll never understand the level of violence it took to become this gentle. And I think sometimes it takes that level of like understanding certain cultural differences and understanding um you know those stereotypical norms to be able to kind of break that cycle and break out of that unhealthy norm that we know and see on a day-to-day basis. And you know, a lot of times you see that picture of like matches lined up, right? And if you see, you know, you strike the first match, all of them start burning. But then if you pull one out of the mix, like that's what it takes to break that cycle. It just takes that one person, that one safe adult, that one, you know, child or teen to make a different decision and try something different. Um, and it's crazy how if you are in that level of unhealthy norms or abusive norms, and you start to surround yourself with that healthy level, you start to feel like be in conversations where your body feels safe, where you feel emotionally safe, where you know that this person that I'm talking to is somebody that I can trust, that I can respect. Like just it almost like changes your physicality altogether. Like you start to just see what calm feels like and know that calm isn't necessarily chaos. Peace and healthiness isn't necessarily like sometimes it's boring and that's okay. You know what I mean? But if you're used to that level of chaos, you're used to that level of, you know, well, these are the people that I know to go to, but they don't necessarily feel safe. Sometimes it takes a while to sort of unlearn that level of trauma bonding, that level of, you know, attachment that we have learned. And that's okay. Like, even if it takes you through adulthood, you know. So I know I do kind of want to, oh, I guess this is a good question. Can you speak on your why? Why have you chosen to do this work? That's a nice big pressure filled. We only have a couple minutes, so it's a nice little kind of tie-in, I guess, to, you know, why has this become important to you, or what is your
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in an environment where abuse was prevalent and normal. And I think that as I got older, I knew that I always wanted to work with kids. And I started out actually in my undergrad to become a teacher. And then I realized that I really enjoyed getting to know kids like one-on-one and like hearing their stories and wanting to like help them through whatever it was. So then I quickly changed to social work. And I kind of fell into Turning Point. It appeared out of nowhere to me, and I just have grown, you know, it holds such a special place in my heart. I think seeing and having the conversations with the kids, and like seeing those light bulb moments where like things are clicking for them and they're starting to make changes in, you know, what is going on in their relationships, is a big reason why I continue to, you know, show up every day and love the work that I'm doing. So that's my why.
That was beautiful.
Yeah, trying to follow that now, Miss Jane.
I agree. Why the I just want to be the person that I needed when I was younger. I also saw a lot of domestic violence when I was young. And I don't think I knew until like now that I was like, whoa, that was really bad. And they're just, I don't know, kids are just tiny humans with like their own little lives. And I just want to be, again, like just what I needed and help them feel seen and heard and just be kids. I always say like a kid's job is to be a kid. And my job is for them to be that kid. So I'll stand I'll stand on a couch and sing Let It Go if I need to. That's okay.
If you do that, please call me over so I can see.
Oh, it literally happens. We always joke that we always joke that like the child and teen team, we're just a bunch of children, you know, and like, yes, we're in adult bodies, but we ourselves are just big kids. And I think that, you know, like we love seeing the kids in our safe house have fun and laugh when they're coming from like such traumatic environments to here, right? And they're living in a shelter and they're kicked out of their homes. You know, it's just like, let's let them have fun and let them be children because that's what is supposed to be happening right now. So
Absolutely. I am so grateful for you guys for this conversation. Somebody said to Geraldine, absolutely working through our own trauma to be there for kiddos to get through theirs too. Absolutely. And I think, you know, Lori, our executive director, often says like nobody is in this work who hasn't been personally affected by it. And, you know, if you think of the numbers, with it being 1 in 3 women, 1 in 3 men, 1 in 4 men, 1 in 3 teens, like odds are everybody in some way has been affected, whether they know it or not. You know, somebody in their life has been affected by abuse. And, you know, this is why we have the conversations that we have. This is why we try to build the awareness that we do. And, you know, you can always reach out to us, whether it be Turning Point and this lovely team of amazing workers and advocates, or, you know, if you ever want to reach out for training, you can always contact us at training@turningpointlv.org. We're here for you, ultimately is what it comes down to, right? We're here to be the people that we are still learning to be and be the best people that we can be, just as, you know, everyone else is, but just trying to lead the path and break that cycle and be the healthiest people we can be. So, and help you do the same. All right. Any last thoughts?
No, this was great. I love this.
I know I could keep talking for hours.
I mean, we can off camera if anyone has any, but no, this is wonderful. Thank you guys for your time. Thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one. So
Yes.
thanks
Thank
for
you,
the
everyone.
conversation. Have a great day.